and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are streaming live from the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy podcast studio, and we are super excited to have John Lewis on our podcast to talk about the importance of polysaccharides in brain health. John, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
I've been playing sports or being physically active since I was, before I even started school. My grandfather got out in the backyard and started pitching baseball to me. I played sports. I played pretty much anything other than soccer that had a ball. And I got into drug-free competitive bodybuilding in college. I realized pretty quickly competitive bodybuilding wouldn't last too long in my life. I was not willing to take drugs. I knew I would never make a living or pay my bills to be able to do that. But what it did was shift my perspective on food from, like almost every American, eating for taste as opposed to eating for health, although I was eating more for a physical performance perspective, really more so than health. But when I realized I would not be pursuing competitive bodybuilding for too long, it shifted me from a sports or physical performance perspective to a health perspective. So that was a really big shift for me that I'm grateful for bodybuilding to help me achieve. I didn't really, it's kind of like a lot of things in life. You go into it not really knowing or expecting what will come out, but that was a big thing. And then a few years later, after I had finished all of my education, I met Dr. Reg McDaniel, who introduced me to his story about aloe polysaccharides, and a lady by the name of Barbara Kimley, who introduced me to her story about rice bran polysaccharides. I didn't know either one of these people. They didn't know each other. It was just one of those things about 20 years ago. Your life takes a change in its journey, or as the Beatles said, a long and winding road. I guess I'm still on that long and winding road. And up to that point, I think most people, unless you're a biochemist, you probably don't even understand or even know the differences in all these sugars that occur in the natural world. Mother Nature creates lots of sugars. And up to that point, I basically thought all sugars were just sources of fuel for the cells. I didn't really have any knowledge. With all due respect to my professors, I had no clue the power and the ability of all of these polysaccharides, or these two particular ones, I should say, from aloe vera and rice bran. And those two people, Dr. McDaniel and Barbara, I credit them very significantly for not only changing my career, but changing my life. And a big part of the reason why I'm sitting here talking to you today is because of the work now, fast forward nearly 20 years later, all of this work that my colleagues and I conducted at our research lab at the University of Miami on these two particular polysaccharides. It's just been a crazy heck of a ride of, just having an experience where you can truly help people with something so simple, yet so elegant from a biochemical perspective in terms of how these sugars affect the body and just how potent they are. And it's given me an opportunity to kind of push back against some of this ongoing narrative. It just absolutely drives me up a wall when I hear some so-called experts say all sugar is bad for you. That's a garbage statement. That is a garbage statement. It's ignorant at best, and it's factually incorrect at worst. And, there could be other reasons in between. I don't know, for some financial or, some other conflict reason, but that is just so untrue. Because yes, if you're talking about high fructose corn syrup, excuse me, the simplest sugar, a monosaccharide, sure, if you're eating that every day, you're spiking your insulin, your glucose, you're creating metabolic complications that you're probably not going to have a lot of joy from down the road, if not sooner than later. But when you're talking about these complex sugars, these polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran, and those are just two plants. There are lots of plants that have polysaccharides. Obviously, these are complex carbohydrates. Again, these are incredibly beneficial. Not only are they not good, they're not, in this realm of, oh, sugar is bad for you. Not only are they not that, they're actually, I would argue, potentially some of the most beneficial compounds or nutrients that Mother Nature provides for us. Maybe curcumin comes close, and that's just not from our research at the University of Miami. That's from scientists and researchers all around the world. So It's been an inspiration for me to spread this message, because for me, as a scientist, as an author, as somebody who's very careful about use of our language, I think it's important when you talk about sugar, you put it in proper context. It's like clean, the use of the word clean or processed, all these words that have caught on recently in the health and wellness industry. People just throw around words and they don't even use them in proper context. So same thing with sugar. I mean, if anything, if nothing else that people learn from me today, besides sharing with you some of the research of our results of our research, I'd like for people to just be clear that not all sugars are equal. And so when you're talking about these complex sugars from aloe vera and rice bran, it's a whole different ballgame. And people also should understand sugar, saccharide, carbohydrate are synonyms. They're all the same thing.
Yep.
But yet sugar has been so bastardized, and it's been put in such an evil category that people can't even imagine. You hear the word sugar and you immediately just think bad. You can't even imagine, oh, wait a minute, there are lots of different sugars, and not all sugars are created equally. So that's part of my mission in life, is to spread the word about our research, but also helping people understand some things about nutrition in general, like the use of the word sugar.
Well, and you said it. I mean, sugar is a very broad term, general term. And the keto people with the keto movement, man, they have vilified sugar. And I have to remind people that the main fuel for our cells is glucose. And now the keto people argue about that. But the facts of the matter is, the Krebs cycle, our body works off of glucose, which is a monosaccharide. It is a sugar. We will die without glucose. You'll go into a coma if your glucose gets less than 30. So sugar is important. Now, if your sugar is too high, your blood sugar, your glucose is too high, that can be problems. But in general, like you say, it's really the kind of sugar, the kinds and the where you're eating them from is what's important.
That's right. I mean, if you look at these sugars from aloe vera and rice bran, they are literally, as I'm sure you know, they're like 5D objects. You cannot even draw them on a piece of paper. They are so complex. They are hundreds of glucose units attached together with these very sophisticated glycosidic bonds. And so when you look at those in comparison to amino acids, fatty acids, certainly vitamins, minerals, these things are way less structurally sophisticated than these polysaccharides are. So when you have anything that comes into our system, usually through the mouth, sometimes, but usually when you put something into your system, what happens? The genes interpret the information from that material, that compound, and then they guide the cells in how to function properly. So to your point about, the keto people making all these, vilifications of sugar, again, I would urge these people to do their homework, because they're being very ignorant about what these polysaccharides can actually do for beneficial effects on our health. And that's ultimately the main thing here. It's not about, you have to subscribe to this or that. No, there are things that don't even fall within the realm. I mean, people ask me questions like, don't they spike your glucose? Well, in fact, no, they don't, because they have it's like the body knows how, we have whatever it is, this spark of life, this inherent intelligence that we have. It's the same thing when you take in calcium or vitamin C or anything. Just the body's inherent intelligence recognizes it and then knows what to do with it. It doesn't spike your insulin because you're taking these complex carbohydrates. It knows how to utilize the material, the information coded within that, to then instruct the cells in how to function properly. And that's every cell in the body. It's all 30 whatever trillion cells we have.
So for most people out there, I think that the lesson is that if it's processed food, if it's refined food, if we're looking at things like fructose and really simple sugars, the absorption is different than a complex carbohydrate, because a simple sugar is going to start the absorption in our mouth. So that's why those things are so dangerous. Is if you're eating something with high fructose, you're spiking your insulin and spiking that much earlier than if you are eating a whole food and your digestive tract is going through the process of breaking it down at different levels throughout the digestive tract of the GI tract. So that's why the insulin is such a problem, I think, especially for our American cultures, when we bring everything out of a box instead of what's made from the earth.
Totally agree. The other thing I think it's important for people to understand about aloe vera is most people think of aloe vera as a topical solution for a sunburn or a cut or a wound, right? I mean, that's commonly what you think of aloe vera, which is fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But that gel is 99% water. So you have a very diluted amount of polysaccharide in that gel. So a lot of times when people hear me lecture or be interviewed like today, they think, oh, well, I'll just drink aloe vera gel and that'll solve all my problems. It doesn't work that way either, because again, the polysaccharides are too diluted in the water. So what we've done with our formula is we've dehydrated the gel, we've taken all that water out, and then we've separated the polysaccharides into a formula, into a concentrated amount of a few hundred milligrams, where now the body can benefit from that. So that's the other thing I'd like for people to take away as well, is the gel doesn't really, it's okay. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. And certainly the polysaccharides that are in that gel will be of very good benefit. But if you're past middle age, if you have very serious health challenges, and we're not talking about treating disease here, but just supporting the body's cellular functioning, you need a bigger dose than what that gel in a drink would give you. So we've done that hard work for people as well.
So what are polysaccharides good for?
What are they not good for is the question.
Okay.
And I'm not being flippant either. I mean, literally in every cell of the body, these polysaccharides are beneficial. I have seen so many amazing effects over just my 20 years. Dr. McDaniel's been at this since, actually it's coming up on 40 years. It was either 85 or 86. He is a trained pathologist, got into this almost 40 years ago. But specifically to answer your question, and I'll stick to what we've published, we can call these materials signaling mechanisms for the immune system. So what the heck does that mean? Well, the immune system has lots of different components to it, right? I mean, whether you're talking the T cells, the B cells, the natural killer cells, dendritic cells, then it's got pro-inflammatory components, anti-inflammatory components. There are components that work in harmony with each other. I mean, it's just such a fascinating organ system. But what we've showed in our research is, number one, they're very anti-infective. In our multiple sclerosis study, we showed an incredible effect on infections. We showed an improvement in overall immune system functioning according to the CD4 to CD8 ratio, which is very important, not just for people with neurodegeneration, but all of us, especially as we age. That's your helper cell to your cytotoxic cell ratio. We showed in Alzheimer's disease patients lowering of inflammation according to TNF alpha and VEGF. These are proteins that are commonly looked at in heart disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first one that showed that in people with Alzheimer's. We showed an improvement in adult stem cell production according to CD14 cells. That's also a really interesting finding related to that study. We can talk about that study a little more specifically. We also showed improvements in the Th1 to Th2 ratio of looking at, again, from a very high level, Th1 being your pro-inflammatory side, Th2 being your anti-inflammatory side. We showed relationships there for the first time ever in people with Alzheimer's disease. We've made several discoveries in our study in Alzheimer's disease that have never even been shown before, just with using these polysaccharides or this polysaccharide formula. So globally speaking, again, you can talk about all these different effects on the immune system, which we could call them immunomodulation, immunoenhancement, lots of synonyms for that same topic. But essentially, it's almost like an adaptogenic response where if you're turned on too much, the body says, okay, we're too high here, let's cut that down. Or if we're too low here, let's turn that up. But it's all about balancing, right? I mean, it's all about putting things back to homeostasis or rebalancing all these different components. And we have such an impressive amount of information that we've published. Just from these two studies, we've published 7 articles in the peer-reviewed scientific literature that we use as the basis for Dr. Lewis Nutrition and Daily Brain Care. But again, it's incredible what these things will do, what these polysaccharides will do for the immune system.
So what's the difference between the aloe vera polysaccharide and the rice bran polysaccharide?
That's a great question. So structurally, the aloe vera is actually more sophisticated. So what we know so far is that the aloe vera polysaccharide is actually way more complex than the rice bran polysaccharide. Excuse me. The rice bran is interesting too. I'll just talk about that for a second. So from what I've gathered, about 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice. So rice has basically three components. You have the outer husk or hull that's like, cardboard or wood or something you can't eat. And then the next layer is the bran. Unfortunately, as I said, 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white. So that's the last layer. That's that big endosperm of digestible starch. So actually, most bran gets either thrown away or fed to livestock. So actually, the animals end up eating the best part of this amazing plant compared to us humans. But the rice bran is where all those polysaccharides, amino acids, fatty acids. I call it like a dirtier material than the aloe polysaccharide. The aloe polysaccharide is a bit more of a clean material in the sense of not having some of these other components to it. But they are essentially functioning like signaling mechanisms for the immune system, sort of similarly. But it's fascinating when you look at the two, and that's why we combine them together, because we feel like putting them together, you get the best of both worlds of what these plants provide for us.
That makes sense. So is it a 50-50 ratio in your formula?
I would say it's no. I have a little bit more rice bran in there because it's a little bit less expensive material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine aloe is probably quite a bit more expensive than rice, for sure.
It is. And it's difficult to grow as much aloe vera as rice. I mean, you have, lots more areas in the world that produce rice compared to aloe vera. So it's a more, not hard to get, but it's just a less available material than the rice bran is.
Yes. Janet, what other questions do you have for John?
So John, with this, I don't know. Right now, we're kind of sitting in this political movement of making America healthy again, which I'm all for. But so tell me what your perspective is about how you feel your product is going to improve besides Alzheimer's. I mean, what other things can we share with individuals that might improve their overall health and longevity?
Well, I didn't even mention the most exciting finding from our Alzheimer's study. I'll give you that. I'll give you that, and then I'll answer that question, just because I don't want us to lose the opportunity to mention this to our listeners. So in our Alzheimer's study, we looked at people with moderate to severe severity of disease, which is the worst. You're basically in the worst category at that point. On average, they were 79.9 years of age. So these were pretty old folks that were pretty sick. Not only did they have Alzheimer's, they had diabetes, depression, different forms of heart disease. So a very impaired group of people that obviously big pharma they don't focus on people at that stage in terms of coming up with some sort of treatment or prevention. But in response to our formula, we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function at 9 and 12 months. We tested cognitive functioning at baseline 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And then we drew blood at baseline and 12 months due to our limited budget that I mentioned, some of those immune findings that we showed from baseline to 12 months. But I mean, guys, that's unheard of. Like, there's no other study you can look at any type of, certainly the 5 FDA approved drugs for dementia won't show that. But any kind of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, red light therapy, music, acupuncture, you pick it. There's no other intervention or treatment that shows that kind of an effect in people with Alzheimer's disease. And again, really pay attention to what I'm saying, clinically and statistically significant improvement. So you could have something statistically significant, but if it's irrelevant to the practical or the real world, who cares, right? Like, it,
Right.
Does it ultimately help people? But on the ADAS-Cog, which is what we used as the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, we showed a greater than 4-point improvement in their scores And so that's what's considered clinically relevant. And it backed up a lot of the anecdotal responses that I got from people, from their caregivers, from staff members as we were running the study. So for me, that was just, the peak of my career in academics, just to be able to show something to help people with this which is now the 6th leading killer of Americans. It's just so tragic. What a horrible disease. But beyond that, I mean, there are just so many things anecdotally, again, beyond what limited funding we've had so far to run clinical trials. There are just so many different things. And also, maybe it's a good time to say for our listeners that please, no one leave this conversation and say that Lewis said you could use nutrition to treat disease. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not making any disease claims here. What I'm saying is these polysaccharides, along with all the other nutrients that the body needs to function properly, if you supply them, the body has the ability to return itself to homeostasis, but it has to do that properly with support from the things that we provide to it. So again, going back to one of my earlier comments, I would just put these polysaccharides up against anything else related to that ability. So the nutritional model says you provide the raw materials and the body repairs, restores, and heals itself. The pharmacological disease model says you provide a synthetic compound to alter a metabolic pathway to treat a disease or a symptom of a disease, and then you get side effects from that alteration, and that's the disease pharmacological model. So we're talking completely different models here, and I never say that we treat disease, but basically think of any leading killer of American, and again, using the C word, you get in trouble here, but heart disease, the C word, diabetes, depression. I mean, there are so many different things. I have had just my own personal experience of having people start on these polysaccharides and then have very profound responses to them that is, again, not treating disease, but allowing the body to heal itself. So again, I don't want to sound like, oh, well, this is just the miracle solution. I don't want to sound like P.T. Barnum or anything here, but truly, based on my own experience and Dr. McDaniel, I mean, you're combining both of our experiences, both research and clinically, over 60 years now, or roughly 60 years of just witnessing so many different things. I mean, he has in his files documented, I believe, over, like, we call them health challenges, 800 different health challenges of all sorts of incredible responses to taking these polysaccharides. So it's so fundamental. I mean, as we all know, oxygen is our first nutrient. And then after that, we need water, and then we need all these various nutrients. But again, if you look at how these things are so complex in their coded information, that's the reason why people with literally anything can respond to them. And I should also mention, let's not wait till we get sick in the first place, right? Yeah. Let's prevent, right? I mean, let's not wait till we end up with diabetes or cancer or heart disease or neurodegeneration. Let's try to prevent that stuff in the first place. So personally, I've been on my own formula for a decade. I've had my mother on it I think mom's been on it over a couple of years longer than me. My wife started taking it over 5 years ago when she was pregnant with our daughter. When our daughter turned 6 months of age, I started her on them. I would have started her from day one, but it's the issue with swallowing with an infant. So I say all that to say that, number one, I'm not a hypocrite. I take my own stuff that I sell. But number two, literally from fetus to elderly, I won't out my mother's age either. She's very sensitive about that. But literally, at every stage of life, for both sexes, I mean, there's no reason why anyone cannot benefit from these polysaccharides in terms of an approach to taking care of yourself and being healthy. So let's prevent this bad stuff from happening to us in the first place. So with all of that said, I would say, as part of the MAHA movement, again, I would put our research up against just our research, just here at this, this one little corner at the University of Miami. Forget everything else that's been shown around the world. Man, if I could get RFK, and I've got a nomination to be part of his movement. I don't know if I'll be selected. I don't even know what that consists of. But if I could get him and whoever else he's helping him to make decisions about utilizing these polysaccharides as part of a comprehensive approach. I mean, I'm not saying we can just give them away. They have to be, paid for on some level, but I guarantee you, compared to what we're spending on chemotherapy and radiation and surgery and medications and all these conventional treatments, the amount of efficacy and effectiveness that you get out of these polysaccharides compared to all of that other stuff, and the cost differential between would just be enormous. I mean, it would be an incredible win for our country if we got, all of these sick people taking polysaccharides every day. And I've seen, again, with people that don't even make changes to their diet, to their physical activity or exercise habits or other things. I mean, that's like a whole different level, right? I mean, that's getting people to change very complex and very ingrained behaviors. But just adding on like a dietary supplement to your daily routine can have such incredible benefit. If we could then get people to address diet and exercise and these other things, now you could really be talking about wins for people. But just even getting them to take this dietary supplement every day could be huge, and it would completely dovetail within the MAHA movement.
Yeah, for sure. And John, you may or may not know, but Jan and I are both pharmacists, and we are two pharmacists that don't believe in drugs to treat most long-term disease. I mean, we look at all these diseases, whether it be diabetes or whether it be a reflux or name a disease, and it's like we have a drug for it. But do those diseases actually, are they caused by a drug deficiency? Well, that's a silly question, because
Right.
it's caused by things we're lacking in our diet, things we're lacking in our lifestyle. So Jan and I preach sleep, diet, and exercise over drugs commonly, and that's what I think is important in the MAHA movement. And polysaccharides are a macronutrient. They're a carbohydrate, just like you said. It's synonym of carbohydrate, and we need carbohydrates. We need proteins, and we need fats to sustain ourselves. Now, the keto people out there will say there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. I get that. It's not essential, but also without carbohydrates in our blood, i.e. glucose, we will die.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we wrap this podcast up, we're going to stream your website, John, and tell us a little bit about how to get a hold of you if anybody has any questions.
Well, I appreciate your time and having me on your show today. Anybody that has more questions can go to drlewisnutrition.com. That's Dr. No period Lewis, Lewis nutrition.com. You can find us under that same handle on all the typical social media channels as well. But the website is really the best information. I know a lot of people don't like to read today, but the website compared to the social media channels have just so much great information, articles. You can watch videos. You can learn more about my story. The FAQ section is very intense. You have a lot of information under the FAQs. Sometimes people will ask questions, and I've already answered them under the FAQs, but you can reach me there as well. We have an email address, a phone number. If people have more specific questions about, hey, does the polysaccharides, will it do this? Will it do that? There are lots of questions that people have, and I'm more than happy to help people any way that I can as time allows. I mean, I literally try to answer every individual's question or issue. So thank you again for having me on your show. I'd be happy to come back anytime if you'd like to discuss other topics. For the most part, I stay in the lane of polysaccharides, but I mean, for my own personal life, I've been somebody who, I like to be viewed, as you might say, a model of health. I mean, it's very important to me to be healthy. I look at health as our most important characteristic in this life, other than the time we have. We can't do anything about the passage of time, but we can do a heck of a lot about our health. And so anytime I go to a conference or I'm invited to do something, if somebody looked at me and I weighed 400 pounds and regardless of how much I knew, they'd say, well, this guy's a fraud. Like he can't even, walk across the stage without looking like he's going to fall down from a potential heart attack or stroke. So for me, this is my life. I've lived a life of health and wellness for most of my adult life. And I want to hopefully help other people understand how they can do that as well if they have needs. And I know we have a lot of needs in our country today because we have a very sick country. So Absolutely. Again, I'm happy.
Yeah. And speaking of that, John, on the flip side, I'm glad that you're walking the walk, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And when you look at our healthcare system, look at your average doctor, look at your average nurse, look at your average pharmacist. They're a bunch of fat, sick people.
That's
I'm
right.
just saying it. And it's like, then they expect us, oh, take this drug and get healthy. It's like, you really want me to trust you? Seriously? I mean, come on, you're joking, right? I mean, imagine going into a gym and you want to get healthy and the personal trainer is fat. You'd walk out. At least I would.
Exactly.
But that's not what we do in healthcare. Oh, you're a fat doctor. I'll trust you. Sure.
Exactly.
Right? And I just say it. I say it because I'm in the industry, John. So we don't pussyfoot around anymore. We just say it. The industry
I agree
is
with
full
you.
of hypocrites.
I totally agree. Hey, I'm right there with you. I say it too. I'm too old for sugarcoating anything at this point.
Right.
Life's too short, man.
That's right. All right, John. Well, we got to wrap this podcast up, and you have helped us realize our goal, which is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So thank you so much, John, for helping us and helping get that message across to our viewers.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
And listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Thursday to our midweek podcast, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for tuning in.